All right, welcome to a very belated social distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. No white lightning for me, although if I had some whiskey, I'd have made myself a hot toddy because I could use one.
Yeah, everybody around me is still getting relapses into all of these respiratory illnesses, to include COVID, but RSV in adults, all the other coronaviruses out
Hey,
there, which is the
it may
common
come as
cold.
a, yeah, I was about to say it may come as a shock to some people, but there are other coronaviruses. And I believe, I can't remember off the top of my head how many things make up what is called the common cold, but I think about a half dozen of them are coronaviruses.
Well, yeah, it's basically every airborne virus they want to put into that
Yeah,
category. Uh, but
because
uh,
they all make you feel about the same way.
but I'm gonna stick with my I body type. I exercise, but like tacos. Uh, Relatively healthy eating, well-rounded eating, getting enough protein, and keeping my blood 40 proof because I'm almost never sick, which I shouldn't. This is particle board, but I should knock on wood uh, there because I'll probably be the next one to go down. But everybody keeps having these relapses. But I think on your part, because you mentioned something the other day,
Hmm.
man, got to get some more vitamin D. We got to get some
Oh, for sure,
sunshine, people.
for sure.
Everybody. This is why I despise. I have a love hate with doctors, anyways, but I kind of despise dermatologists because they still to this day want you to slather up an 80 proof anytime you want. You have a hint of going around the sun, and I'm like, your small chance of developing a melanoma versus everything else vitamin D does for your immune system. You, yeah, maybe you get a melanoma if you get too much sun. Cut the damn thing out.
Yeah. It if I'm going to be out for a long period of time, like when we went fishing, I spray on the heavy duty stuff, but that's because I don't tan outside of my farmer's tan. I get really red, I peel really bad, and I'm miserable for a week or more. But if I'm only going to be out in the garden for 20 minutes, no, I don't bother because it's not going to be enough to burn me or do anything harmful, and I need the vitamin D. Got to
Yeah,
get
but
the D.
there that helps with the prescription because you don't tan very well at all means you don't need as much exposure.
Hmm.
So you were wearing that long sleeve shirt and the hat and everything. 15-minute intervals. Take the shirt off and put it back
Yeah,
on
yeah,
after
yeah.
15 minutes. Because one thing about the recovery is you don't need to be out of the sun as long as you were in it to go back to baseline.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if you're out there for 10 minutes, go back in for 2, then back out for 10. And I can be out in the sun relatively decent amount of time without burning because we were out there all day. It was
Mhm. Yeah.
6 hours on the water, and I
I-
actually had more of a
yeah.
wind burn from having to stand back by the pilot than anything else.
Oh
So,
yeah.
and I'm not even that tan, but I can relatively handle a lot of sun. uh, but yeah, I think that's one reason I'm almost never sick is because I make sure I get it whenever the sun's shining. I try to be outside unless I'm working.
Hmm. Well, and even then, sometimes you can go outside if depending on what you're doing. So
Well,
let's take it outside and do some
I
agility
I
work.
can't because
Well,
I can't
yeah.
look like a business from the street. Remember, I can't do my work
Nah.
outside. I can't be seen working per HOA and zoning laws. I'm
So
allowed to do what I do as long as I follow those rules.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what are we
But
talking
we're
about today,
we're
Samo?
technically not late on this one because we're on Wheel of Time,
True.
and we're taking a break from the main story to go with a prequel in the new spring, which was what 1998,
I
I
believe
think.
so.
Yeah, Robert Jordan was doing prequels before prequels were cool. Uh, Actually, it says 2004 copyright
Yeah,
on
that's
my.
what this one is too.
Yeah, but even still, it
Yeah,
was.
this must be a re-edition or something because I remember that that was one of the things, the big white book and this are why Path of Daggers took longer to come out
Now, Big
between
White Book, we
books.
were still in high school because I remember
Hmm.
convincing the librarian to get it for our library. Let's see, new spring release.
But I was just as we were talking about before we started, I was just gonna skim to refresh my memory.
1999, September.
Okay. Uh, but as I started reading it, I just started reading it
Mhm.
because it's been way too long since I've read this, and That opening chapter is so darn good. Especially at the point where this comes out, because I'm trying to remember if we've had a Lan point of view to this point in the series yet. I know we get some short ones towards the end of the series, um, but I'm not sure that we've had one to this point yet.
You might maybe a quickie, like a couple paragraphs, like you get
Mhm.
bits with Shider Heron and stuff, just to fill in a blank. Like, didn't we see a point of view when he was leaving after Moiraine
I didn't
passed?
think so because that was from Rand's point of view. He was talking to
Oh,
Rand. He and Rand were talking.
hmm. I
Yeah.
just, for some reason, it felt like there was something between that moment and when we see him again in the little tower.
And I'm trying to think that when his exchanges with Nynaeve, I think those are all from her point of view. Or
Mm-hmm.
or the one in the at the end of the Eye of the World, that's actually still from Rand's point of view, and he feels bad for having accidentally eavesdropped on them.
Yeah, it just feels like at some point, maybe it hasn't happened yet, but
Hmm.
you get Lan thinking about Rand, about how he needs to guide him, but he's come so far, and or something
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
Uh,
So you not only do you get a Land point of view, but you get him before he's even met Moraine, before any of this stuff has happened. Um, and you get I don't know how he does it. It's hard for me to put a finger on it, but you get that he's already pretty well formed. He is who
mhm,
he is, which the more you get of his backstory, the more you realize when they say he was, raised from an infant with a sword in his hand, that's not really hyperbole or metaphor. Is no, from as soon as he could hold it, he was being trained in martial duties. He was being trained as a king without a kingdom,
mhm.
uh, as a warrior with a never-ending war. And so this is someone who, and this is as we go through this more, I'm curious where your thoughts will go, but I mean, we've talked about the childhood of the Emmonsfielders, and that's especially in contrast with some of the people they meet along the way. Specifically, last time we were talking about the big difference between Elaine and Nynaeve, how even though they can act similar in some ways, they're very different people because of where they came from and
Mhm.
how their childhood was. Here you have someone who didn't have a childhood. He was raised by warriors. He was raised by all male warriors in a warrior code, a pretty strict warrior code. You get that, really from the beginning, not just the warrior code, but when
A
this
complete honor
Terran,
system.
yeah, when this
Yeah,
Tyrant comes up and you get him thinking to himself, basically biting his tongue, and they have different ways of honor down here. So I just need to be patient and put up with this guy. But he didn't announce himself. He didn't get off his horse. And from Land's point of view, I think that's wrong. I think that's impolite, but they do things differently here in the Southlands. But then as the guy goes, Land gets more and more annoyed because, all right, you can have different ways of doing things, but now we're getting into that you don't even know what honor is, you don't even
hmm.
know what politeness is kind of territory.
I like how in his mind the honor systems aren't always complete logic, right? So in his
Yeah,
mind, the order of announcing yourself and the whole course of that conversation was dishonorable. But and to say his name would have been boasting, but to say, hey, if I said I'm going to do it, it happens with just such certainty. In
yeah.
the South, you would call that boasting.
Hmm.
But it was completely. I mean, it's not boasting to him.
No,
It's
because well, partly because of that culture and that honor system is you are your word. That your word carries a tremendous amount of weight in the borderlands where you're under constant danger. Um, and and same thing with the Emmons Fielders. The reason Matt is like that, I haven't really thought of this before. The reason Matt is the way he is because his dad's a horse dealer. This in a rural area, this is a place where a handshake seals the deal. So you
mhm.
had better be as good as your word,
and
or
looking in and looking in the horse's mouth is an insult.
you are very quickly going to develop a bad reputation
Mhm.
much more quickly than you can actually solidify a good reputation. So you had better be as good as your word, or your livelihood is done.
Yeah, especially somewhere like like Eamon's Field, where the uh, the magnitude of population is so low
Mhm.
that you screw one or two people over, you're no, you're done as a business person
Yeah.
because everybody knows and there's no more people to screw over. It's one of the things about modern society is 330 million people in the United States. If I'm a Machiavellian crooked, snake oil salesman and I get called out here in Friendswood, I can move to New York. Within New York, I can move all over the place because
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
millions of people to keep swindling. So
Yep. From Land's point of view, you get a little bit of this about the borderlander culture, but it's literally life or death, because yeah, there'll be some skirmishes between kingdoms, but for the most part, there is never fighting amongst the borderlanders. In fact, it's commented on, can't remember where this is, but somebody makes a comment about, um, I can remember I can remember even almost the dialogue, and I can't remember the scene, where somebody's talking about events that are going on in the world, and there's rumors and stories about fighting going on in the Borderlanders, and someone
mhm.
says, well, "Why is that?" Actually, the Borderlanders never fight. They don't do this. They have the Trollocs to fight.
I think that was a swan perspective when we were making our way to the little tower because
Yeah, yeah,
it
I
was
think so.
yeah, it was so surprising to her just because I mean she's the consummate politician in the
Hmm.
continent. She would know
Hmm.
these things.
Yeah, so from Land's perspective, humanity has to stick together because you're fighting literal monsters.
Hmm.
So uh So if he says he's going to be the anvil, then by golly, you'd better be, and the hammer better be there on time too, or you're going to get killed and eaten. And hopefully in that order.
Yeah, hopefully in that order, which we see from perspectives of people in Shao Ghul, or what was the city around it? Started with a T, right?
Thakandar,
Yeah, yeah, where
yeah,
they're
the on the slopes.
they're
Yeah,
making the blades, and so that they're taking people in there to make the blades, but then they're basically eating the rest.
yeah, yeah.
Well, even poor Peyton Fane, we talk about a guy in trauma and how he was already a crooked dude, and then he was a dark friend on top of it. But then he describes in his first point of view, they freaking put him in a cook pot to
They
carry
made him.
him
Oh yeah,
around
yeah, that's right.
to
They
to
made him
to, to sh-
sleep in it to mess with him. Yeah,
yeah, to just to
I
just to
forgot
mess with
about
him.
that.
Yeah, and so you've got a crooked dude who found out that this thing he probably swore to without knowing what he was doing was
Hmm.
real,
Hmm.
and now he's in the middle of it. Not only is in the middle of it, oh, they don't care about you enough that they might eat you if they get hungry.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Okay, pause for a second.
all right, all
All
right,
right.
sorry for that hiccup. But also the one more thought on Peyton Fane when we're talking about his development. Not that it has anything to do with the rest of this book right now, but the cook pot. It's no wonder that he would be not only just a bad dude, but he would be so tempted by the evil of man that contrasted the evil of the Dark One
Hmm.
and the Trollocs because he wanted revenge for that cookbot. That's
That's a good point.
part of his development. That's part of what's
Mhm.
strengthening him. When he kills the Murdral in book 2, he's thinking about that while he's killing the Murdral. So part of his strength and part of his affinity for more death is the fact that now he hates everything.
That's a good point, and ties into where we left off last time because we're that that new evil that has
Mm-hmm.
happened since the Dark One was sealed away is now another player in the
Well,
game.
yeah, and that's that one of those deeper philosophical thoughts because when we talk about humanity, we are special compared to other animals. And if you really think about it, there is the evil that is nature, the chaos, the
Hmm.
you know the animal that eats your entrails while you're still alive. Those are all not good things. Those are all horrible things, but they're actually not evil. they're just they're just being. It's just the negative
Yeah.
side of being. Whereas humans, or actually we see this now as we study animals, the more intelligent the animal, the more capable of evil they are. Raccoons will rip apart chickens just for the fun of it, not even to eat them. They'll eat one and then rip apart the others because it's fun. The more the intelligence, consciousness just has its own kind of evil where we're doing it just because.
Mhm. All right. So back to the actual text here.
Yeah.
There was another thought I had as I was reading this that I don't want to go too much into, but especially when in a couple of pages when what's Bukama, the
Mm-hmm.
the old man that was one of his trainers, um, especially when he shows up, there is this interesting parallel that I hadn't noticed before between Lan and Bukama, this chapter, and um Ascension we're going to meet in a couple of books here. I don't want to go too much into because of spoileriness, but the Death Watch guard
Mm.
that we get some points of view from here in a little bit.
Yeah, I'll have to look out for that because I know who you're talking about.
Mhm.
But yeah.
So there's an interesting parallel um between you know the men and their temperament and their attitude, and the similarities but differences in who they are as people, um, because they were they were both raised from childhood in a martial culture, not just in a martial culture, but to be warriors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and pretty early on to be elite warriors. But what's interesting about the Death Watch guard guy is he had a family, which changes him.
Mm-hmm.
But you also get the impression that he's older than Lan, so you start to see that as Nynaeve comes into his life more. You start to see that change of becoming a husband with the expectation of maybe if we live through this becoming a father. So you start to see that change a little bit, which is another reason that coming out when it did is this is so great because that kind of their separate arcs have finally come together. And so now, having seen how Lan is starting to change because of Nynaeve, and now we're going to backtrack before even the Eye of the World and see him back to Mr. Fatalistic, um, reserved, and all of that. Um,
Which is funny because we are talking about him being raised a certain way. So I just
yeah.
looked up what Land's age would have been in the series, and of course they in the big book they give the date of his birth and they give the time the series starts with Rand and everybody. He's 45, so that would make him 25 at this moment,
Mm, mhm, mhm,
and so he's quite mature for his age. But that also
mhm.
helps with because you got to balance things with these characters because he's got to be old enough to have the maturity that he has, which would be accelerated from his upbringing. And well, 25 years old, his prefrontal cortex is intact, so he's
Mhm.
right there on the edge of that. Uh, but he can't be so old that even as a warder, he would start physically declining. He's still the most badass warrior in the world. With respect to some close challengers.
Mhm.
But yeah, so we're both in our 40s. You feel it. It's uh, so
Oof.
so so he's 45, but then we get the slowing when he becomes a warder at some point. So yeah, it's a delicate balance with these characters because you want to just write a badass character, but these little details kind of will sink in the back of people's minds. It's like, oh, well, he's that old though. How can he be this badass person that he was?
Well,
Or he's not old enough to be as wise as he is. And
I have a passage just for that, and this again is where I have to think that Jordan's own combat experience comes into play, which is the um growing up before your time that being thrust into war will do for you. All right, so halfway down page 23, uh this is because what I was about to get to was when the Aiel show up and it's way more than just 600. And as you go through Lan's thought process, and he's just noting this as a fact.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't change anything. We're still here. And then um uh and then Bukama gives the great Borderlander embrace death saying. But Lan's thoughts. Calmly, he looked left and right along the line of his men. The Saldeans and Kandori were standing firm, of course, but he was pleased to see that none of the Dominese showed any signs of edginess either. No one looked over his shoulder for a path to run. Not that he expected any less after 2 years fighting alongside them, but he always had more trust of men from the borderlands than elsewhere. Border men knew that sometimes hard choices had to be made. It was in their bones. And so you have that, as he says, it's in their bones because it's in their culture. It's what they grow up with. But then 2 years of warfare to add even to basically put the edge on the blade that his growing up made. And now you have actual, not just skirmishes, not or whatever, but 2 years of warfare to hone that edge.
Well, and it's funny because what we do know from some of the data that you can become more cognitively there by doing things like climbing trees. And it's the blending and not just doing balance exercises. So like doing complicated yoga versus climbing a tree. They're different, even though they use the same motor skills, but that element of danger that goes with messing up actually causes your brain to adapt really quickly. So everybody here, 2 years of fighting Aiel, if you're alive, your brain has learned a lot of good things in that time. It has culled the weak, but also sharpened the iron in the best way you could possibly sharpen it.
All right. This is another one of those great when prequels are good and when they can be done right. Is at the end of the chapter, all the Aiel shout as one on Ali, however you pronounce that. Um, and we know what that means because we've been following along, and we were it was actually explained in
In
a
book
fair amount
four,
of
yeah.
detail in the Shadow Rising. But Lan and Bukama just look at each other confused. What does that have to do with anything? What does that mean? And why are they saying it? And then they turn and leave. Um,
And I like how Bukama's like, "Do we follow? Like, let's go kill him." Like,
yeah, it's like,
the
well, we
the
came
better
here
part,
for
yeah, land is here. The better part of valor is we'll
we
just take it out on the other guy.
we came here for a fight. So what do we do? Um, I do like the little bit of the rope a dope there, the subversion of expectation that uh this is set at the end of this starts at the end of the Aiel War, and we've heard about the blood snows from a couple of different perspectives. First and foremost from Tam when he's in his fever dream. So you're expecting something big to happen here, and then it's oh no, now we're leaving. We're done. We're leaving now.
Yep. Now, one thing about this chapter is we get a badass leading up to, but not culminating battle
Mm-hmm.
scene. We get in Lan's mind for the first time. We introduce a few key characters with Bukama and Lan, but also you get the history of the Aiel War, including the thoughts about borderlanders, the difference between nations, North and South, the Aiel themselves, in 25 pages
Mm-hmm.
without just giving a dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
Just from the lead up to that moment, you get all of
Yeah.
that, which you get bits of in the previous books, but this just like sums it all up right here.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is I mean, that's a lot of what this book is he took things that he'd given as little nuggets, Easter eggs, mysteries. It's all there. There's not a lot that he's revealing here. There are some revelations in the book, but mostly it's just putting all those pieces together and then fleshing them out a little bit is why it works so well. Um, and it's also a great example chapter of Jordan's writing and why it works. I mean, kind of what started two old guys grumbling and ranting at each other was the series was so awful, and I wanted to go back to the source material to show this is why it worked. And if you can't understand why it worked, then you're not going to be able to create your own thing, even if you're using source material, because you don't understand why it worked. So you're going to be lost from the beginning. Um, because you get all of that you just talked about in the world. This isn't a narrator explaining
Mm-hmm.
to you. This is Lan as he saw it, as he would think about it. So so the explanation isn't uh people love history. They hate taking history classes because history is interesting. And so the more popular history books are the ones where the writers write with a narrative style. And those are the ones that the snobby academics look down on. Well, but they're making history what it is, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a dry lecture, then people aren't interested in it. And that's what he's able to do is he by having the point of view style, it's never a dry lecture. Even when somebody is giving a dry lecture, like when Rand is talking to Herod Fell, and it's he's a philosophy professor that's way too smart for everybody else and doesn't make any sense, but because it's from Rand's perspective, it's hilarious. And then as you say, I love the way it ends here that uh we will find Lord Amaris and talk politely concerning hammers and anvils.
Well, and also you get this. This is that age thing as well. He's 25, mature for his age, but
Mm-hmm.
we get a nice moment of inside Land's head that he still feels the same things we do. He's just trained in a way to kind of bypass that.
Yeah.
Then he even checks himself after he lets go of the flame in the void. Then he's like, okay, I mentioned his name and it didn't make me angry. Okay, we're in a good spot. We're mentally ready. Whereas, you can imagine there's probably been times based on that he's been angry, tried to get rid of it, and then it didn't quite hold like it should have. So yeah, he's only human, right? He's just a badass human.
I love the immediate contrast we get in the first paragraph of chapter 2
Mm-hmm.
because you have so now we switch to Moraine's point of view, and the contrast is even sharper with her from who she is going to become to who she is now because her world experience has been very limited. For all it's been difficult growing up, even leaving as young as she would have because she had the spark, even leaving as young as she did, she would have had to have participated to some degree, at least in the learning of the game of houses. Difficult, but still kind of a pampered life. The White Tower, difficult, but still kind of a pampered life. You get a little bit of that when the girls go to the tower because uh, you get Egwene's perspective looking at Elaine going, this is what I did every day.
Yeah, it's like the difference between being a servant and a farmhand. They're
Mm,
both servants of sorts, but one of them gets to do it in the comfort of because if you're serving a king, your environment is the
yes.
king's environment.
That's a great analogy because of what Moiraine thinks here. Um, because even the farmhand, you take him out of that work and put him somewhere where he's going to have physical struggles. It's going to be physically challenging. he'll cope better than the servant
Mm-hmm.
because he's used to that kind of work, even if he's not used to that work. As Moraine is thinking here, you know, kind of complaining in her head about the icy cold and the draft. Um, Another struck her closest friend as well, but for all that Sawan was tiring, she would not have let it show if she were freezing to death. The Sun Palace in Carheen, where Moraine had done most of her growing up, had often been as cold in winter, yet she had never been forced to stand in drafts. So, yes, Mo Sawan comes from Houston, basically,
Yeah.
and now they're in Chicago. But Sawan is used to difficult difficult labor in uncomfortable circumstances, which is what they're doing here. It's not even difficult labor. I mean, from Sawan's perspective, you're just standing around, and yeah, it's in difficult circumstances, but hey, that's what you do. So she's used to it, even if she's not used to this specifically. All right, you gotta start talking more. My throat hurts.
uh I didn't get all the way through this chapter, but
So uh this chapter I remember better, even though I haven't read the chapter in a while. But um, I have read the graphic novel, and that opening chapter with Lan goes by really quick in the novel. It's almost like a prologue, and then this is where it really starts to pay more attention to the story. Um, and is the opening here is another example of what you were talking about with um uh all of that being there, and now we're just getting detail
yeah, yeah,
because
the about the battle outside of the
so
tower. Yeah.
we're getting it from Maureen's perspective as reports come in, as she's thinking about it, and you get this long setup. Um, you get this long setup, which includes um, Maureen thinking about how Sawan is her closest friend and how
Mm-hmm.
odd that was. How
From a status standpoint, from a class kind of standpoint, or yeah, and
mm,
that's the thing about the tower. It's actually similar to, I don't know if you remember going, just being in the dorm at school. You kind of all had this common thing where it didn't matter if you were from Texas or
mhm,
Kansas or Oklahoma, or from a poor background like I was, or my other roommate at the next semester, Sam, he was actually from a very well off background, but we clicked like that.
mhm,
So is you're Parkerites at that point. Well, here you're novices, you're accepted, you're not Moiraine the noble and
yep.
Swan the fisherwoman.
And something that is another one of those in-world perspectives, and he never spells it out, is something Jordan kind of shows is that the people who succeed are the ones that can look past that can put that part of their life behind them and embrace what's in front of them. Because we meet plenty of novices and accepted and full Aes Sedai that very snobbishly hold on to their pre-Aes Sedai prejudices. That, whether it's because someone is from a particular region, the way they talk, that's a that's a big thing in Britain, is very classist. We're obsessed with race in America. They're obsessed with class in Britain because they have been for centuries. And so if you talk a certain way, then you are a low class person, no matter how much money you have. And so you're going to be looked down on. And so you get some of that. You get, obviously from Nynaeve's perspective, she's had to deal with people who just hate wilders. It doesn't matter that you started learning. Uh, I can't remember who that is. Is it Phalion? No, because she's the full that that even looks at Egwene as a wilder
Mm-hmm.
because she
I think it's
started
following.
learning.
If a
Okay, it is.
Yeah.
Because Egwene started learning outside of the tower and has the heart, the spirit of a wilder. Moiraine should on the surface be one of those people because not only was she did she grow up in a palace, not only did she grow up very high um in money, but in status as well. And yet, um, because she is a deeper thinker and a more ethical person, she's able to look past that. Or perhaps more accurately, just say it's not that she's able to look past that, it's that she reflexively looks past that because she's looking deeper. That's just who she is. That's why her and Sawan get along so well, is because that surface level stuff is nothing more than detail to them. It's it doesn't matter. It's not the thing. It's just the details about the thing. And so they both look. It's why they both go blue. It's why they form this secret alliance to find the Dragon Reborn before the Dark does. Um, and
Let's see. Falion, it was the Black Sister. And
there's someone with a similar name that was a
yeah, I know who you're talking
septon.
about.
Um, goes on a good. Where is it? Where it finally gets to? Um,
Phelan.
yes, similar name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's see. Let's see. Here we go. Finally get to it. Page 36. So we go from page 26 all the way to page 36 before we actually get to the point of the chapter, which is the end of the chapter and the main thing that we have been told before. So 10 pages of buildup, of detail, of filling in gaps of character and background to get to Jatara Morosa having her foretelling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as Moiraine relates verbatim. Um, and it's such a shock to her, and she's already really old, that she keels over immediately. Um, and I like the little moment of, because we're only gonna see her a little bit, and we've heard about her, but Tamra, the the Amarillan here, is as she goes down uh to try and uh heal her keeper, is not now, Jatara. Tamra breathed softly. She sounded weary to the bone. Not now, when I need you most.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and it's interesting here the reaction from it, and well, of course that's kind of what the rest of the book's about. But she states in her foretelling, he is born. I feel him. He takes his
mhm,
first breath on the slope of Dragonmount,
mhm.
and the reaction is, shh, not we need to get the freaking Dragonmount and find a baby.
Yeah. Um, you
All hands on deck. You know.
it does say something about the tower, and um you get impressions that Tamara was a very good, very strong Amarillan.
Mm-hmm.
I think she may have been blue as well, because I think there was one of the grumblings when we get into the politics of the White Tower. One of the complaints about Sawan is that she was one in a string of blues. Um, and I always got the impression that she was one of those few Aes Sedai that acknowledged that the black was real. No, I mean, at least to herself, that she recognized this was a very real possibility, if not a probability, and something that needed to be guarded against.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right. Why wouldn't she summon the hall immediately and say, "This is what the foretelling was. We've got to get to work. We have got to find this child." But her first reaction is, "You keep your mouth shut.
Mm-hmm.
Sealed to the flame. You don't tell a single soul about this ever."
Well, and this is our complaint as well as Scott's complaint about the Aes Sedai is that they trip over their own feet with their own plotting and scheming. The immediate reaction is a plot and scheme,
Hmm.
not to let's solve this damn problem.
Yes.
Because wouldn't it be great to get a hold of this child who may or may not destroy the world and be the good guys and the influence in their life? It's the old, if you had a time machine, would you go back and kill Hitler? It's like,
Hmm.
no, I wouldn't. I would go back and find where he turned into the scumbag he was and try to raise him better.
Hmm.
There's more than one answer to this. A psychopath can grow up to be a murderer like that, or can grow up to be a high power CEO.
Hmm.
It just depends on the intervention along the way. And that should be the thought. We should be finding this guy and grooming him for at least getting on the better end of this. Now, obviously, it's not the way fate works, but uh, it's still the Aes Sedai playing their part in that weave in their
Hmm.
very annoying way.
Well, and then it kind of compounds because uh, as we're going to get into, the main plot of the plotting is then that's what Swan and Moiraine do. It's like, okay, well now it's our turn to scheme as well. All right, but that's the setup. We'll get more into it um as we go forward. And the interesting thing to me, besides just the coolness of the story, is going to be, since we've been doing this reread and talking about it so much, I'm curious what other kind of parallels and things are going to pop out at me that I hadn't really thought of or noticed before.
Yeah, because this is where you'll see Jordan's notes when it comes to the later books, especially because
Hmm.
we may see things that are in even the Sanderson writings that you're like, oh, that had to be in the notes because here we
Hmm.
go. Uh, but I think my takeaway from the first few chapters, rereading them, was kind of the same thing for both. Is we get this nice summation of the the continent, the people in it, their interaction, including the Aiel, but also a little bit inside Lan's head to see what makes him a person. And then we get the history, the things we already knew but didn't have the filled in gaps in the tower, but also inside Moiraine's head. And you see the things that make up their dynamic in the other books. Moiraine is rash, even though she's serene and all of these things that
That's a
they
good
put
point.
forward. She's got the Aes Sedai serenity, but the very nature of what she's doing in the books is rash, is bold,
Well,
and
a
Lan
great
is the rock.
a great example of that is what we see at the very beginning, those first like 10 chapters of The Great Hunt, when Sawan is pissed off of, we had a plan, but new information came up, and then uh Moraine just decides, okay, we're all going to Shinar. Let's go.
Well, and even some of the thoughts inside of her head where she's like, well, I didn't really think about it, but I would have betted Rand if it would have gotten the what we needed. I mean, she would do
Hmm. Hmm.
anything to accomplish the goal. She's an ideologue,
Yeah,
and Lan is a stone of logic and reason, and uh, but we see that he has the capacity
it's a
for
good
the
point.
emotion,
She
but
she's the theoretical physicist, he's the engineer.
mhm, yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at their dynamic that I hadn't really thought of before.
Well, and we see the moments that Lan stands up to Moiraine at occasion. Well, now we've been inside his head for the stone to move.
Mhm.
We know the anger had to be white hot.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
So if
All
he
right. Well,
says no, we're not going to do this time, that was anybody else screaming no and falling to the floor and throwing a tantrum on the ground.
yeah. All right. Well, that does it for the brief Watt talk. Just wanted to get some in there because I was dying
We'll do
earlier this week.
we'll do the comments and I don't think we really have any spoilers with this now because the whole book is
Yeah, there may be some references to other stuff down the road. Um, but not that I can recall. We'll see, you know, on a reread.
but this is
Like I say,
actually
if anything
technically
pops up.
going to be the second time I read this book. So
Was there were only a couple of comments, so
yeah.
we can just knock those out real quick and then we'll stop and do some non-Watt talking.
Yeah, this is why we're doing this. This is the point where it fills in the blanks. Yep. Uh okay, so the second one, this is I don't think Samael used the phrase full box when he gave him to Shido. Uh this is page not 814 if you have the paperback. The last full paragraph. He says, "This is a Narbaha." He said, "It uses Satan, so none of you will see anything, and it has limits." Uh, that phrase right there, the Narbaha, is what Grendel was referring to when she said
Mhm.
full box. So he
Yeah,
does say it, but he doesn't say full box. He says it in the old tongue, and that's what we were talking about.
yeah.
It was kind of the you mean there's no wise ones in there that spoke the old tongue? Because that would have been a hey, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Hmm. Uh, yeah, I remember now the next comment is the one that kind of popped out to me when I was looking at them because that yeah, Jordan does say they're on our list, but of course Jordan isn't saying that because he does it from a point of view. And to me, that's the interesting thing about the Shido, especially when we start to get their perspective more, is that not to them.
Yeah.
They're
Well,
still
and
Aiel.
even we get semi perspective, I mean second degree perspective in the annoying Fail storyline of why the brotherless joined them.
Hmm.
Because now we've got even a not Shido perspective on what was the honor there.
Yes.
And uh they're even being judged by the Shido by being called the brotherless.
Hmm.
They're the ones that are they're saying that don't have the honor.
Yeah.
So we're getting a very complicated mix of what constitutes the honor there, because the brotherless wouldn't be there if they didn't if it would have been completely dishonorable to do so.
Hmm. Yeah. That to them, all the other Aiel, all 11 other clans are fallen and they're following this wetlander pretender and they've lost their minds because they've declared this wetlander the Karakarn. We are the only true Aiel left.
Which is the irony because none of them are the true Aiel.
The Tinkerers are closer than they are.
You know, they're the same descendants.
Mm. Well, originally, but now there's gonna be so much. Oh, geez, cat. There's gonna
Well,
be
it's the
so
one
much
drop rule,
intermingling.
right? There's
Yeah,
one drop of blood in there. You know, it's
yeah. And stupid show. That is the kind of place where you can have your diversity because it makes sense.
mm-hmm.
Because they are, for some reason, you're not allowed to say this anymore, but they are a gypsy-like people. They have no permanent home. They travel in caravans all over the known world and even cross the waste, which put some respect in the kids when they hear this,
Mm-hmm.
that holy cow, they crossed the waste. Maybe they're not as cowardly as I thought they were. So that's the kind of place where and sometimes younger people will find their way appealing and will join them. All right, I'm done with my ranting. So
Yep, me too.
we
Well,
will see y'all next time and hopefully get a
yeah,
lot farther.
yeah, that's it for Wheel of Time. We'll do this in two parts, so you don't have to fast forward or rewind or anything. In the next, if you want to stick around for part two, we're gonna talk some football draft.
All right.
All right, see y'all next time.